On January the 1st of 1948, Britain's big four railway companies, the London, Midland and Scottish, London and North Eastern, the Great Western, and the Southern, were merged together and nationalized into a single big cohesive company called British Railways. And at this time, the entire network was still very much recovering from the bloodshed of the Second World War. Track, infrastructure, architecture, rolling stock, it was all damaged or destroyed. To say nothing of a number of steam locomotives that were blown up by the Germans during air raids. Modernization was needed, but as a stopgap, one of the potential fixes for the problem was designing a brand new fleet of modernized steam locomotives that could be used across the entire network, rather than continuing to build new engines based on the old designs from the Big Four, which were more limited in where they can go. As such, the British Railways Standard Range was born. Today on Local Profiling in Episode 5, we're going to look at the very first of these locomotives to be built. This is the story of number 70,000, Britannia. She was built in 1951, and it was the very first locomotive of her class. The Standard Class 7 Pacifics, better known to you and me as the Britannias, because in fact, like I just said, number 70,000 was named Britannia. In total, 55 of them were built between 1951 and 54, and they had a fairly unique distinction. Namely, they were the very first 462 Pacific-type locomotives in Great Britain, at least when it comes to tender engines, that worked just as well on freight trains as they did on passenger assignments. On paper, they may not seem as powerful as some of the express engines that came before them, but that's okay because they weren't just built for express trains. Again, they were also intended to work on freight trains. So instead of 3 or even 4 cylinders, they could only make do with just 2 of them. Now then again, they were pretty bonkers at 20 by 28 inches, so they're still pretty big. Combine those with a boiler pressure of 250 psi and 74-inch driving wheels, and you gave the Britannia's attractive effort of 32,162 pounds. Not too shabby. Their power classification was definitely towards the top as well. As I said, Class 7 on the old LMS power chart of 0 to 8 in terms of number, and then when it comes to lettering, MT for mixed traffic or dual service, as opposed to P for passenger, XP for express passenger, and F for freight. So yeah, versatile machines in their own right. As for Britannia herself, number 70,000 was completed on the 2nd of January of 1951. So even though I'm 2 weeks late, at least happy birth month, Britannia. I'm still doing it on the correct month, so yay? Specifically, she was built to crew. And again, not only was she the first locomotive of the Britannia class, but also the very first locomotive of the whole BR standard range, with the whole idea being to create, multi-purpose locomotives that could work across the whole UK network by taking the best practices of all of the Big Four and combining them together. On Britannia, for example, the boiler was inspired by the LMS, some of the valve gear parts and the cab layout and regulator positioning from the London North Eastern, and the trailing wheels and rear pony truck from the Southern. The Britannias did have a very good reputation with British Rail, even being praised as the #1 most reliable steam locomotives on their books, so that's gotta count for something. But tragically, the career of these locomotives was cut quite short, being withdrawn as early as June of 1965, and the last one going in August of 1968. And as for Britannia herself, number 70,000 was taken out of service in May of 1966. It was initially destined for the National Railway Museum in York because of her cultural significance, but due to her prototype design and construction differences, they ended up picking the only other survivor, number 70013, Oliver Cromwell, instead. That kinda sucks. But fortunately, the engine was picked up by the Britannia Locomotive Company Limited, and after a series of moves, she was eventually returned to steam on the Severn Valley Railway. Britannia's initial refurbishment was a very long and painstaking process, and difficult too because it took place outside, because the volunteers who carried out the work didn't have access to any kinds of shopping facilities to do all the mechanical repairs needed to get the locomotive running again. But their perseverance paid off big time. Upon the completion of the refurbishment in May of 1978, a huge crowd gathered, including the locomotive's original designer, Robin Riddles, who expressed his gratitude to the volunteers, praising them for doing such a good job of restoring the iconic Pacific. In fact, Riddles even renamed the locomotive Britannia. I mean, granted, it had already been named Britannia before, but they wanted to make it a bit extra special. And that only makes it even more depressing that over the course of the engine's careers in the preservation era, it had sadly suffered a few reliability issues. And the same could be said for Oliver Cromwell. This hurts even more when you consider the fact that, like I said previously, Britannia and Oliver Cromwell are the only two remaining Standard Class 7 Pacifics out of the total of 55 that were built. So yeah, it's such a terrible shame to see the locomotive suffer so many problems in preservation. That's not to say that they were badly looked after, but to quote Christian Green from his Steam Locos in Profile episode on these engines, it just goes to show you that running a steam locomotive today is like running an old car. Even if both of them are of the exact same make and model, you're never going to find two that are exactly identical in terms of mechanical shape, whether or not they're in good condition or bad condition. There's always going to be some that are better than others. And when it comes to Britannia and Oliver Cromwell, both have suffered as a result. But you can tell the two of them apart. For one, Britannia has actually operated in BR Black for a few times in preservation, whereas Oliver Cromwell has always remained in British Railways Green. Naturally, there's the numbers and the names, again, 70,000 Britannia and 70013 Oliver Cromwell, and Britannia has a big air pump on the front. And then there's a minor difference when it comes to the smoke deflectors. Britannia still has the original hand rails, whereas Oliver Cromwell has new hand holes cut into the deflectors, done as a massive safety precaution after one of the other engines, number 70026 Polar Star, derailed at a crossover in Didcot in the early 1950s. Ouch. Speaking of reliability issues on the Britannias in preservation, number 70,000 actually suffered a fairly interesting one. I wasn't able to find the video of it anymore because I believe it has been taken down, and I couldn't find any other information on it. But at some point in the 1990s, perhaps in 1991, shortly after the engine was back onto the main line, she suffered a failure in one of the two bearings on the right-hand driving rod. I don't know if it's towards the coupling rod or the crosshead, but it was such an interesting failure that the driving rod had to be taken out, and the locomotive made its way back to wherever its home base was at the time on only one cylinder. That is actually quite a special fuck-up indeed. James May, go ahead. Say the C word. Cock. Presently, Britannia is down, awaiting overhaul due to the engine's boiler certificate having expired on the 1st of September of 2020. Yay, as if we didn't need more bad news with COVID, god damn it. It was planned that the locomotive would go straight into the works at Crewe, but who knows? Thanks to COVID, that might have been delayed, obviously. Hey everybody, just doing a few last things before I wrap this video up. Firstly, when it comes to local profiling episodes 3 and 4, which were the Q1 Duplex, 6130 from the Pensy, and Reading 1187, I missed out on a few things, or I got a few things wrong. I got something wrong in the former, and I missed something in the latter. So when it comes to the former, in that episode I was also briefly re-elaborating the Q2 duplexes, and I horribly screwed up on the tractive effort. I said 1,816 pounds, but I meant 100,816 pounds. I mean, seriously, you would expect less than 2,000 pounds of tractive effort from an engine that big? No, of course you wouldn't. You would expect much more tractive effort, so yeah. And when it comes to Reading 1187, I forgot to basically tell you what camelbacks really are. So like, I believe some steam engines that were being manufactured in the United States in the 1890s, I believe, the 1900s and the 1910s, like that period, yeah, like there were steam locomotives that were being built that were, you know, fitted with these wide wooden fireboxes, which was done on purpose so they could use that slow-burning anthracite coal, because it needed a large firebox because it burned more slowly. However, those wooden fireboxes were so big and so wide that you couldn't actually place a cab on the back end side of the boiler. And as such, the boiler had to be moved further forward, down the, like roughly halfway or midway onto the boiler, which resulted in it basically, you know, being like a little shelter on top of it. So that's why those were called camelbacks. And they had their own unique problem due to the fact that if the engine was to have some kind of catastrophic rod failure on the right-hand side, it could potentially kill the engineer. So at some point in the 1910s, ordering new camelback locomotives became illegal. So yeah. So that's all I got. But there's one more thing that I'd like to say, and that's happy birthday to the world's slowest man, James May. I'm just as slow at making this video as he is at life in general. Also, bad news, James. You have a very terrible birthday present. At least here. Snow.
I hate snow.